Her hand trembled as she pressed the knife against his throat. Blood trickled down the cold steel blade as the man's eyes widened with fear. Behind her, a deep voice cut through the silence. "Wait, Emma!" The warehouse fell silent except for their ragged breathing. The knife in Emma's hand caught the dim light filtering through dusty windows. Her eyes, once soft and frightened, now burned with a determination that surprised even her. Mason Ghost Hayes stood frozen, his hand outstretched, blood streaming from a wound on his temple. His voice, when he spoke again, was steady despite everything. "He's not worth it. Not like this." Emma's grip tightened on the knife. "He won't stop. He'll never stop." The man beneath her blade laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "You don't have it in you, waitress." Emma pressed harder. Another drop of blood. Another choice. 72 hours earlier. Rain pounded the windows of Sunrise Diner like nature's own percussion, drowning out the Wurlitzer jukebox playing Benny King's Stand By Me in the corner. Outside, the neon sign flickered against Montana's evening darkness, casting alternating shadows of red and blue across the empty parking lot. Inside, Emma Wilson wiped down the counter for the third time that hour, her movements mechanical, her mind elsewhere. Cedar Ridge, Montana wasn't a place people came to. It was a place they passed through, or sometimes, like Emma, a place they disappeared to. The clock on the wall, an old Coca-Cola advertisement from the 50s, read 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes until closing. 13 minutes until she could lock the doors, count her meager tips, and make the drive back to her trailer in the rain. The television mounted in the corner was playing the evening news, something about tensions with the Soviets' President Reagan making statements about the Cold War. Nobody was watching. The diner held only two customers, a man in booth 7 and a newcomer at the counter. Emma's eyes flicked nervously to booth 7. Victor Reed, that wasn't his name, at least not the one he gave when he first started coming in 3 weeks ago. He'd said his name was John, but Emma had seen his real name on a credit card he'd once carelessly left visible. Victor Reed. He came in every night, always that same booth, always ordered black coffee, never finished it. Always watched her. Tonight, he wore a faded baseball cap pulled low, a plain windbreaker despite the cold, and that same empty smile that never reached his eyes. His Casio digital watch blinked 11:48. He hadn't touched his coffee in 20 minutes. He wasn't here for the coffee. Emma tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear, fighting to keep her hand steady. There had been notes left on her car, hang-up calls to her home number that wasn't listed anywhere. Last night, she'd seen his gray Chevy Caprice parked down the street from her trailer headlights, off engine running. When she'd looked out her window an hour later, it was gone. The bell above the door had jingled just before 11:30. Emma had looked up from the register to see a man she'd never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, soaked from the storm. He'd stood in the doorway for 3 heartbeats, rain dripping from his leather jacket eyes, scanning the diner with practiced efficiency. His gaze had lingered for a fraction of a second on booth 7 before he'd made his way to the counter. "Coffee black. Burger no fries," he'd said, voice like gravel under truck tires. Now he sat silently, his weathered hands wrapped around the ceramic mug. The silver ring on his right hand caught the fluorescent light with each small movement. Not a wedding band, something else. Military, maybe. A Navy insignia. Emma studied him from the corner of her eye as she reorganized clean silverware that didn't need organizing. Mid-40s, she guessed. His face told stories his mouth didn't. A small scar above his right eyebrow, crow's feet that came from squinting in harsh sun, not from laughter. His dark hair was cut short, not military short anymore, but old habits died hard. His motorcycle jacket was high-quality leather worn, but well-maintained. When he'd unzipped it, she'd caught a glimpse of a name stitched on the inner collar. Mason. His eyes moved constantly, taking in everything while appearing to focus on nothing. The way he positioned himself, back to the won't clear view of the door, right hand always free, told Emma he was someone familiar with danger. In the reflection of the coffee pot, Emma saw Victor shift in his booth. The bikers, Mason's eyes flickered toward the movement without turning his head. Aware, alert. His posture straightened almost imperceptibly. Emma made her decision. The cook had left at 11:00. Her boss trusted her to lock up. It was just the 3 of them now. She grabbed the coffee pot with trembling hands and walked toward the counter, where Mason sat perfectly still, watching the world through reflections and peripheral vision. She leaned in close, pretending to refill his cup, though it was still half full. "That man's been stalking me," She whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain and music. 3 weeks. I don't know what to do. Mason didn't move, didn't look at her, but something changed in his posture. A subtle straightening of his spine, a slight tensing of his jaw. His eyes, which had seemed tired and distant moments before, sharpened like a blade being drawn. He took a slow sip of coffee. Sierra Tango Niner, he said quietly. Emma blinked, confused. It's a recognition code, he explained, voice low. Means I understand the situation and I'm here to help. How long? 3 weeks, she breathed. Maybe more. He shows up wherever I go. The grocery store, the laundromat here. Always watching. He touch you, Mason's knuckles whitened around his mug. No, but yesterday, her voice caught. Yesterday he was outside my trailer when I got home, just sitting in his car. When I looked at him, he waved. Mason nodded almost imperceptibly. What's your name? Emma Wilson. Emma, I need you to go back to the kitchen. Stay there until I tell you it's safe. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Understand? She nodded, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. And Emma, he finally turned to look at her directly. His eyes were steel gray, weathered by years of something she couldn't quite name. You did the right thing telling me. Emma hurried back behind the counter, disappearing through the swinging door into the kitchen. Through the small square window she watched. Mason finished his coffee, slowly, methodically. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, left a $20 bill on the counter for a $12 meal, and stood. He zipped his motorcycle jacket with deliberate calm, like a man preparing for something inevitable. The bell above the door chimed as he walked out into the rain. Emma's eyes shot to booth 7. Victor was sitting forward now, alert. He'd watched Mason leave. For a moment he seemed uncertain. Then he threw down a $5 bill and hurried toward the door. Through the rain-streaked window, Emma saw it unfold like a silent film. Mason was standing beside his motorcycle, his back to the door, seemingly checking something on the bike's chrome handlebars. The rain poured down, soaking his leather jacket, plastering his hair to his head. Victor emerged, pulling his hood up against the rain, walking quickly toward a gray Chevy Caprice parked at the far end of the lot. Then Mason turned. It wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no aggressive movement. He simply stepped into Victor's path and stood there immovable as a mountain. Rain poured down his face. He didn't say a word. Victor stopped. Even from inside, Emma could see his body language change, fear replacing confidence. He tried to step around Mason. The biker moved with him, blocking his path again. Words were exchanged. Emma couldn't hear them, but she saw Victor's mouth moving rapidly, gesturing his face, transitioning from annoyed to concerned to something approaching fear. Mason just stood there silent, arms crossed over his chest. The message was clear. I see you, I know what you are, and I'm not afraid of you. Victor's shoulders slumped. He backed away toward his car, fumbling with his keys. Mason watched him the entire time, not moving an inch, until the gray Caprice's taillights disappeared into the rain-soaked darkness. Then instead of returning to the diner, Mason mounted his Harley. The engine roared to life, a thunderous sound that vibrated the diner's windows, and he rode off in the same direction Victor had gone. Emma pressed her hand against the window, her breath fogging the glass. She felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, a flicker of hope. Maybe it was over. Maybe Victor would finally leave her alone. But deep in her gut, a voice whispered the truth she didn't want to face: men like Victor Reed. Don't give up. Emma locked the diner doors at midnight, her hands still shaking as she fumbled with the keys. The parking lot was empty now, just her old Honda and puddles reflecting the neon Sunrise Diner sign. She drove home on autopilot, checking her rearview mirror every few seconds. No gray Caprice, no headlights following her, just rain and darkness. Her trailer sat at the end of Maple Court, a sagging single-wide with a broken porch light she kept meaning to fix. She parked, grabbed her purse, and ran through the rain to her door. As she slid the key into the lock, something made her turn around. Across the street, barely visible in the shadows between two streetlights, sat a motorcycle. Its engine was off. The rider was just sitting there, a dark silhouette in the rain, watching, protecting. Emma's hand went to her chest. She raised it slightly, a small wave of gratitude. The figure nodded once. She went inside, locked every lock, and for the first time in weeks, she slept without nightmares. She didn't know that across the street, Mason sat on his bike until sunrise, his eyes never leaving her door. The Harley-Davidson FXRT wasn't the most comfortable bike for an all-night stakeout, but Mason Hayes had endured worse discomforts. The rain had stopped around 3 a.m., giving way to a clear, cold Montana pre-dawn. His joints ached with old injuries and new stillness, but his mind remained sharp-focused on the trailer across the street. As first light crept over the eastern mountains, Mason finally kick-started his bike. He needed coffee, a phone, and information. In that order. 20 minutes later, he sat in a booth at a truck stop off the interstate, nursing a steaming cup while the payphone against the wall finished connecting his call. Yeah, a gruff voice answered on the fourth ring. Jim, it's Hayes. A pause. Ghost Jesus Christ, it's been, what, 5 years? 3, listen, I need a favor. Another pause. Still calling in markers from guys who owe you, huh? Mason's mouth tightened. Would I call if it wasn't important? A sigh crackled through the line. What do you need? Run a plate for me, Montana, 25-7-118. The sound of pen scratching paper. Give me an hour. I've got 10 minutes. A snort. Some things never change. Hold on. Mason heard the click of a computer keyboard, the squeak of an office chair. James Connolly had been military police before joining the Montana Highway Patrol. They'd served together briefly in '78. Mason had pulled him out of a burning helicopter in Turkey. Jim had never forgotten. Got it. Victor Reed, 35 Helena address. No wants, no warrants. Mason frowned. Too clean. Driving records pristine, not even a parking ticket. Nobody's that clean, Jim. Yeah, well, hold on. More typing. Huh. What? I'm looking at residency records. He's only been in Montana 8 months. Before that, nothing I can find. Mason's instincts hummed, like he appeared out of nowhere. People move ghost. People leave paper trails. Can you dig deeper? A heavy sigh. I shouldn't even be doing this much. What's this about? Mason hesitated. Protecting someone. Jim was quiet for a moment. There is one thing. It's probably nothing. Vehicle matching that plate was reported in the vicinity of a missing persons case about 2 months ago. Young woman in Billings. Case is still open. Mason's grip tightened on the receiver. Name? Sandra Mercer, 26, waitress. Never made it home from her shift. A chill that had nothing to do with the Montana morning settled in Mason's bones. You said there were others. I didn't say that. Jim, another sigh. There might be similar cases, 2 in Wyoming, 1 in Idaho, nothing connecting them officially. Except all waitresses, all young women living alone. Silence on the line. Then you always did see patterns nobody else would admit were there. Be careful, Mason. This isn't Grenada. You're not in uniform anymore. Mason hung up left money on the table and headed for his bike. He had more calls to make, but not from here. Not with what he now suspected. Grenada, 1983. Operation Urgent Fury. The night was thick with humidity and the smell of gunpowder. Special warfare operator second-class Mason Hayes moved through the jungle with 5 other SEALs. Their mission to extract an intelligence officer from the Richmond Hill prison before the main invasion began. They'd gone in fast and quiet, 6 shadows moving through the darkness. They'd found their target, plus 3 American medical students who weren't supposed to be there. The extraction was going perfectly until it wasn't. The ambush came 200 yards from the extraction point, Cuban forces waiting in the tree line. Someone had talked. Someone had known. Gunfire. Screams. Mason pushing the civilians into a drainage ditch, covering them with his body. Lieutenant Parker, taking point, drawing fire away from the group. Go get them out, Hayes. Mason hadn't wanted to leave him, but the mission was the civilians. Always the civilians. They'd made it to the helicopter, all except Parker. Mason had tried to go back, but Chief Reynolds had physically restrained him as the chopper lifted off. He's gone, son. He's gone. 3 days later, they'd found Parker's body. He'd taken down 4 enemy soldiers before they had overwhelmed him. At the memorial service, Parker's wife had pressed something into Mason's hand. Her husband's Navy SEAL trident pin. He always said if anything happened to him, you should have this. Said you were the best operator he'd ever known. Mason had tried to refuse, but she insisted. You would have gone back for him. That's what he told me before he deployed. If anything happens, Hayes will come for me. That's all anyone can ask for. But he hadn't gone back. He'd completed the mission, saved the civilians, followed orders. And Lieutenant Parker had died alone in a foreign jungle. I'll never leave anyone behind again, he'd promised himself then. A promise that had defined the rest of his naval career and every day since. The memory faded as Mason pulled his Harley into the parking lot of a small motel just outside Cedar Ridge. He needed sleep, but first he needed to make sure Emma Wilson would be safe during the day. Victor Reed would be more cautious now, but men like him didn't stop. They recalculated. They waited. They watched. Mason checked into the Crossroads Motel under a false name, paid cash for 3 nights, and collapsed onto the bed fully dressed, his 45 within easy reach. He set his watch alarm for noon and closed his eyes. 4 hours later, Mason sat in the parking lot of the Sunrise Diner again, watching. Emma's Honda was there. She'd made it to work safely. He'd drive by her trailer later, make sure there was no sign of the gray Caprice. But first he had calls to make. At a gas station phone booth, Mason dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. Roadhouse. I need to speak to Bear. A pause. Who's asking? Ghost. The sound of the phone being set down, muffled voices, then heavy footsteps. This better actually be Ghost, or somebody's getting their ass kicked today. Despite everything, Mason smiled. It's me, Bear. Holy shit, where are you? Montana. Small town called Cedar Ridge. What the hell's in Cedar Ridge? Mason watched a pickup truck pull into the gas station, 2 men inside. Not Victor, not a threat. Trouble, Mason said finally, the kind we handle. Bear was silent for a moment. How bad? Bad enough that I'm calling in the team. Another silence longer this time. All of us, all of you, must be serious. You haven't called since Miami. Miami had been 3 years ago. A child trafficking ring. It hadn't ended well for the traffickers. I wouldn't call if it wasn't necessary. I know that, brother. Bear's voice softened. What's the play? Mason explained what he knew about Victor Reed and Emma Wilson, about the similar cases in neighboring states, about his suspicions. Bear listened without interrupting. When Mason finished, the big man's response was immediate. We'll be there tomorrow. I'll call Doc, Shadow, and Kid. Thanks, Bear. Don't thank me. Just stay alive until we get there. Bear paused. And Ghost, good to hear your voice, brother. Mason hung up feeling something he hadn't felt in months. A sense of purpose. The Steel Guardians were coming, his team, his brothers, the only family he had left. Emma's shift ended at 3 p.m. Mason watched from across the street as she emerged from the diner, scanning the parking lot nervously before hurrying to her car. No sign of Victor Reed or his Caprice. Mason followed at a distance as Emma drove home, making sure she wasn't being tailed. Once she was safely inside her trailer, he circled the neighborhood twice. Nothing suspicious. Still, he parked his Harley a block away and found a vantage point with a clear view of Emma's trailer. The afternoon stretched into evening. Mason kept watch, ignoring hunger in the October chill. As darkness fell, he noticed movement. Emma leaving her trailer, getting into her Honda. Mason kicked his bike to life and followed at a safe distance. She drove to a small grocery store, parked, went inside. Mason waited in the lot, eyes scanning constantly. 15 minutes later, Emma emerged with a single bag of groceries. As she approached her car, Mason noticed a gray sedan turning into the lot. His body tensed. The car was the right make and model, but as it passed under a streetlight, Mason could see the license plate. Not Victor's, just a coincidence. Emma drove home without incident. Mason resumed his vigil near her trailer. Around 10 p.m., his patience was rewarded. The gray Caprice crept down Maple Court, headlights off. Victor Reed was back. The car parked 2 blocks away. Mason watched as a figure emerged, moving with practiced stealth between shadows, approaching Emma's trailer from the rear. Mason moved silently through backyards and side streets until he had a clear view of Victor. The man was standing behind Emma's trailer, peering through a small window. Inside, Emma moved about her kitchen, unaware of the eyes watching her. Every instinct told Mason to confront the stalker now, but years of training held him back. He needed to understand what he was dealing with. This wasn't just about tonight, it was about ensuring Emma's long-term safety. Mason followed when Victor finally returned to his car. The Caprice drove to the edge of town, then turned onto a dirt road leading to an old farmhouse set back from the highway. Mason memorized the location before heading back to keep watch on Emma's trailer. Around midnight, Mason had made his move. The farmhouse sat dark and isolated, the Caprice parked outside. Mason approached on foot, moving silently through the overgrown fields surrounding the property. The house was run down but not abandoned. Through a side window, Mason could see light seeping from beneath a closed door, likely a basement or back room. Mason circled the house, checking windows. Most were covered with yellowed newspaper or curtains. At the rear of the house, he found what he was looking for, a small window at ground level leading to the basement. A faint light glowed inside. Carefully, Mason knelt beside the window. It was dirty but uncovered. What he saw inside froze his blood. A wall covered with photographs. Dozens of them. All of Emma. Emma at the diner, Emma at the grocery store, Emma getting into her car, Emma through her trailer window. But it wasn't just Emma. On another wall, more photos. Different women. 3, no 4 others. One photograph showed a newspaper clipping. Mason could just make out the headline, "Missing Waitress Baffles Authorities." Beside the photos, a desk covered with papers, maps, and what looked like fake IDs. And weapons. A handgun. Hunting knives. Zip ties. Mason had seen enough. Victor Reed wasn't just a stalker. He was a hunter. And Emma wasn't his first prey. Mason retreated as silently as he'd come, mind racing. He needed his team now. Emma Wilson was in far more danger than even she realized. Back at his motel room, Mason pulled out the battered Motorola two-way radio he kept for emergencies. It was old technology but reliable. Bear and the others would have theirs. "Ghost to Steel Guardians, Priority Alpha, respond." The radio crackled with static before Bear's deep voice came through. "Bear here. We're on the road, Ghost. ETA 16 hours. Situation's worse than I thought. Target is serial predator. Multiple victims suspected." A pause. "Understood. We'll push it to 12 hours. Kids bringing the hardware." "Roger that. Safe travels. Ghost out." Mason set the radio aside and checked his watch. Just past 2 a.m. He needed to get back to Emma's trailer. Victor Reed had escalated from watching to approaching her home. That meant his timeline was accelerating. As Mason stepped outside his motel room, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. Years of combat had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. Someone was watching him. He scanned the darkened parking lot, hand moving to the small of his back where his .45 waited. Nothing moved in the shadows. No unusual cars, no obvious threats. Still, the feeling persisted. Mason mounted his Harley but took a circuitous route back to Maple Court, watching his mirrors for headlights, listening for engines. Nothing followed him, but the unease remained. Victor Reed was hunting Emma. But what if someone was hunting Mason too? Dawn broke over Cedar Ridge, painting the sky in watercolor pinks and golds. Mason, still at his observation post near Emma's trailer, watched as lights came on inside. She had survived another night. His radio crackled. "Ghost, this is Shadow. We just crossed the state line. ETA 4 hours. "Copy that," Mason responded quietly. "Approach with caution. Possible surveillance on my position." "Understood. Shadow out." Mason checked his watch. Emma would be leaving for her shift soon. He needed to contact her to warn her about what he'd discovered, but approaching directly might put her at greater risk if Victor was watching. As if summoned by his thoughts, the gray Caprice appeared at the far end of Maple Court. It drove slowly past Emma's trailer, then continued around the block. Mason ducked lower behind the hedge he was using for cover, tracking the vehicle's movement. The car circled once more before parking several hundred yards away, partially hidden by a vacant lot's tall grass. Mason could just make out Victor's silhouette behind the wheel, watching, waiting. 10 minutes later, Emma's front door opened. She emerged, locking up behind her. Mason watched as she walked to her Honda, constantly scanning her surroundings, the hypervigilance of prey, aware of a predator's presence. As Emma drove towards the diner, the Caprice pulled out to follow. Mason started his Harley, letting them both get ahead before joining the deadly convoy. At the diner, Emma parked and hurried inside. Victor's car cruised past, not stopping. Mason parked his bike behind the diner, out of sight from the road. He needed to get a message to Emma without Victor seeing. Inside, the morning rush was in full swing. Emma moved between tables with coffee pot in hand, her smile professional, but her eyes haunted. Mason took a seat at the counter, waiting for a moment when she was alone. That moment came 15 minutes later, when Emma disappeared into the kitchen. Mason followed, pushing through the swinging door. Emma gasped when she saw him, nearly dropping a stack of plates. "It's me," Mason said quickly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "We need to talk." You were outside my house last night," Emma said, recognition dawning. "The motorcycle." Mason nodded. "Victor Reed was there too, watching you from his car." Emma's face paled. "He's still following me." "It's worse than that. I found where he's staying. Emma, he's got photos of you everywhere. Newspaper clippings about missing women. Weapons." Emma set the plates down with shaking hands, steadying herself against the counter. "Missing women." Mason stepped closer, voice low. "I believe he's responsible for the disappearance of at least 4 other women in the region. All waitresses, all living alone." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "What am I supposed to do? I can't just leave. This job is all I have." "I've called in some friends, people I trust with my life. They'll be here today." "Friends, former military like me." We help people in situations like yours. Emma looked skeptical. What, like some kind of vigilante group? Mason's expression remained serious. We're just men who believe that sometimes the system fails people who need protection. We fill in the gaps. A tear slipped down Emma's cheek. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. Mason was silent for a moment, memories of Lieutenant Parker flashing through his mind. Because a long time ago, I made a promise never to leave anyone behind again. The kitchen door swung open. Larry, the diner owner, stopped short when he saw them. Everything okay in here, Emma? He asked, eyeing Mason suspiciously. Yes, just taking a special order, Emma said quickly. Larry looked unconvinced, but nodded. Table 6 needs coffee. When he left, Mason pressed a folded napkin into Emma's hand. My motel and room number. Come there after your shift. Don't go home. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Emma clutched the napkin. I'm scared. I know, but you're not alone anymore. Mason glanced at the door. I should go before I attract attention. Be careful. Watch for the gray Caprice. Emma nodded. Thank you. Mason slipped out through the back door, circling around to his motorcycle. As he mounted the bike, he scanned the parking lot. No sign of Victor Reed or his car, but something else caught his eye. A black sedan with tinted windows parked across the street. It hadn't been there when he arrived. Mason started his Harley, watching the sedan in his mirrors as he pulled out of the lot. The car didn't move, but Mason could feel eyes on him. His instinct had been right last night. Someone else was watching. But who? At precisely 3:47 p.m., 4 motorcycles thundered into the Crossroads Motel parking lot. Mason stepped out of his room to greet them, relief washing over him at the sight of familiar faces. Jack Bear Thompson was the first to dismount, removing his helmet to reveal a graying beard and weathered face. At 53, he was the oldest of the group, a former Green Beret who'd served in multiple conflicts. His Harley Fat Boy was as solid and reliable as the man himself. Ghost Bear said, engulfing Mason in a bear hug that matched his nickname. Good to see you breathing. Thomas Doc Reynolds unstrapped medical bags from his BMW touring bike. At 49, the former combat medic still had the steadiest hands Mason had ever seen. You look like hell, Ghost. When's the last time you slept? Sleep is overrated, Mason replied with a tired smile. Mike Shadow Davis, his former Army Ranger scout, said nothing as he dismounted his Indian chief. He nodded once at Mason, his dark eyes scanning the surroundings, always vigilant, always watching. Shadow spoke little but missed nothing. The youngest at 35, Lucas Kid Wilson, secured his Kawasaki Ninja before approaching. The former Marine Force recon operator grinned, slapping Mason's shoulder. Heard you found trouble without us. I'm hurt. Found it and confirmed it, Mason said, his expression turning serious. Come inside. We need to talk. In the motel room, Mason laid out everything he'd discovered about Victor Reed. The wall of photos, the missing women, the weapons. Classic predator pattern, Shadow said quietly. Stalks them, learns their routines, waits for the perfect moment. Bear nodded. Question is, why hasn't he made his move on Emma yet if he's taken other women? Why the extended surveillance? Something's different about this one, Doc suggested. Or his pattern's evolving. Or he's working for someone else, Kid added, causing everyone to look at him. What seems weird that he just showed up in this town randomly. Why here? Why her? Mason frowned. Kid's right, there might be more to this. Emma's shift ends in an hour. She's coming here afterward. She knows about us, Bear asked. Knows you're coming. Doesn't know what we do. Bear nodded. Good, let's keep it that way for now. Mason filled them in on the black sedan he'd spotted outside the diner. Could be related to Reed, could be something else. I'll check it out, Shadow said. If it's still there. Take Kid with you, Mason instructed. The rest of us will wait for Emma. As Shadow and Kid prepared to leave, Mason's radio crackled to life. Ghost, come in. It was Shadow already on his bike outside. We've got company. Mason moved to the window. Across the parking lot, the same black sedan he'd seen earlier was pulling in, moving slowly past the row of motorcycles. Everybody down, Mason ordered, drawing his .45. This could be Reed or whoever he's working with. The sedan parked 3 spaces away. The driver's door opened, and a man in a suit stepped out. Average height, clean cut, definitely not Victor Reed. He walked directly toward Mason's room, hand inside his jacket. Federal, Bear whispered, recognizing the stance. $10, says badge in left breast pocket. The knock came 3 sharp raps. Mason approached the door cautiously, gun held low against his leg. Who is it? He called. Agent James Sullivan, FBI. I'd like to speak with Mason Hayes. Mason glanced at Bear, who shrugged. Mason tucked his pistol into the back of his waistband and opened the door. The man outside held up a badge and ID. Special Agent Sullivan, may I come in? Mason studied the credentials before stepping aside. What does the FBI want with me, Agent Sullivan? Sullivan entered, eyeing the other men in the room. Actually, it's what you might want from the FBI. I understand you're looking into Victor Reed. Mason kept his expression neutral. I don't recall mentioning that name to any federal agents. Sullivan smiled thinly. James Connolly, Montana Highway Patrol. Old friend of yours, I believe he mentioned your inquiry. Mason tensed. Jim called you. Not exactly. We monitor certain database searches. Missing women cases across state lines tend to get our attention. Bear stepped forward. Jaya, why don't you cut the crap and tell us why you're really here? Sullivan looked from Bear to Mason. May I sit? Mason gestured to a chair. Sullivan sat unbuttoning his jacket. Victor Reed isn't his real name, Sullivan began. At least not according to any records we can find. He appeared 8 months ago with a manufactured identity. Perfect documentation, but no history before January. So you've been watching him, Mason said. Sullivan nodded. We have reason to believe he's connected to a series of abductions across the Northwest. 5 women missing in 3 states over the past year. Why haven't you arrested him? Doc asked. No evidence, nothing concrete linking him to the disappearances. We need to catch him in the act or find where he's holding them. If they're still alive, Bear said grimly. Sullivan's face darkened. We have to believe they are. Mason leaned against the wall. You still haven't explained why you're here talking to us instead of maintaining your surveillance. Because yesterday you went to Reed's farmhouse. You saw what's inside, and now you've called in reinforcements. Sullivan gestured to the group. I know who you men are. The Steel Guardians. You operate outside the law. Bear tensed, but Mason raised a hand to calm him. We help people the law can't or won't protect. Sometimes that means bending rules. I'm not here to arrest you, Sullivan said. I'm here to propose a partnership. Mason raised an eyebrow. Partnership? Reed is careful. Too careful for us to get a warrant based on what we have. But you're private citizens. Different rules. You want us to do your dirty work, Shadow said from the doorway. Get evidence you can't legally obtain. Sullivan didn't deny it. I want those missing women found. If they're alive, they don't have much time. Reed's accelerating his pattern with Emma Wilson. Mason exchanged looks with Bear. If we help you, what's in it for Emma? Protection. Full federal protection once we have enough to move on Reed. And until then, she's just bait, Doc said, disgust evident in his voice. Sullivan stood. I'm not asking you to use her as bait. I'm asking you to keep doing exactly what you're planning to do. Protect her while gathering intelligence on Reed. Difference being you'll be in the loop, Mason said. Exactly. Mason considered for a moment. I need to discuss this with my team and with Emma. Sullivan nodded, producing a card. My direct line. Call me when you decide. After the agent left, Bear turned to Mason. Fed's wanting to play with us. That's new. He's desperate, Mason said. These cases have gone cold. We're his last chance to find those women. If they're still alive, Kid said, echoing Bear's earlier comment. The room fell silent, each man contemplating the implications. Finally, Shadow spoke from the doorway. Emma Wilson just pulled into the parking lot, and there's a gray Caprice 2 blocks down watching. Mason moved to the window. Emma was getting out of her Honda, looking around nervously. The gray Caprice was partially hidden behind a delivery truck, but clearly positioned to observe the motel. Bear, go get Emma. Bring her inside, Mason ordered. Shadow Kid, circle around behind Reed. Don't engage, just observe. Doc with me. As the team moved into action, Mason felt the familiar calm of combat readiness settling over him. Victor Reed was watching. The FBI was watching. And caught in the middle was an innocent woman whose only crime had been catching the eye of a predator. Whatever game was being played, Mason refused to let Emma become another photograph on Victor Reed's wall of victims. The real question was, who was Victor Reed really working for, and why was Emma Wilson so important to them? The answers would have to wait. Right now, Mason had a promise to keep. Never leave anyone behind. Not this time. Not ever again. Guardian's Honor. Part 2. Bear's massive frame filled the doorway as he ushered Emma inside the motel room. She looked smaller, somehow more vulnerable than Mason remembered from the diner. Her waitress uniform was replaced by jeans and a faded denim jacket, her blonde hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the unfamiliar faces before settling on Mason with visible relief. You came, Mason said, closing the door behind them. Emma nodded. Almost didn't. Thought it might be a trap. Her voice was steady despite the fear etched across her face. Followed your instructions. Didn't go home. Came straight here. Smart, Bear said approvingly. Situational awareness keeps people alive. Emma studied the big man with cautious eyes. You're one of the friends. Bear extended a weathered hand. Jack Thompson. Most people call me Bear. For obvious reasons, Doc added with a gentle smile, stepping forward. Thomas Reynolds, former combat medic. They call me Doc. Emma shook their hands tentatively. There were others outside on motorcycles. Shadow and Kid, Mason explained. They're keeping an eye on things. Emma hugged herself, a protective gesture. He's out there, isn't he, Victor? Mason exchanged glances with Bear before answering. Yes, watching the motel. God. Emma sank onto the edge of the bed, the full weight of her situation crashing down. What does he want with me? Why won't he just leave me alone? Mason pulled a chair across from her, sitting so they were eye level. Emma, there's something you need to know. Victor Reed isn't just a stalker. We believe he's connected to the disappearances of several women across the Northwest. All waitresses, all living alone. Her face drained of color. You think he's... What a serial killer. We don't know yet, Doc said, his voice gentle but honest. But his behavior follows predatory patterns we've seen before. There's more, Mason continued. The FBI has been watching him. An agent named Sullivan visited us just before you arrived. Emma's eyes widened. The FBI knows about this about me. They know about Reed, Bear clarified. They've been tracking similar cases but lack evidence to move on him. Emma stood abruptly, pacing the small room. This is insane. 1 minute I'm serving coffee, the next I've got a stalker, ex-military strangers, and the FBI in my life. She turned to Mason. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? Sometimes it's random, Doc said softly. Wrong place, wrong time. But Mason wasn't convinced. He'd been turning Sullivan's words over in his mind. Maybe not. The agent mentioned Reed accelerating his pattern with you specifically. There might be a reason he chose you. Emma stopped pacing. Like what? Is there anything in your past, anything unusual that might make you a specific target? Emma shook her head. I'm nobody, just a waitress trying to make rent. The radio on the table crackled. Ghost, this is Shadow. Reed's on the move. Headed east on Main Street. Mason grabbed the radio. Stay on him. Keep your distance. Roger that. Bear moved to the window, peering through the blinds. We need a secure location. This motel is too exposed. Mason nodded. My thoughts exactly. He turned to Emma. We can't take you back to your trailer. It's the first place he'll look. I don't have anywhere else to go, Emma said, the hopelessness in her voice cutting through the room. No family, no close friends. Bear's expression softened. You've got us now, little lady. Doc nodded in agreement. Steel Guardians take care of their own. Emma looked between them, confusion mixing with gratitude. But we just met. Mason stood, decision made. Bear, call Sullivan. Tell him we're in, but on our terms. We protect Emma our way. Doc, inventory what medical supplies you brought. I'll brief Shadow and Kid when they return. What about me? Emma asked. Mason faced her. You need to decide if you trust us. Really trust us. Because what comes next will require absolute faith in people you barely know. Emma held his gaze, searching for something in his steel gray eyes. After a long moment, she nodded. I trusted you with my life when I whispered to you at the diner. Nothing's changed. Everything's changed, Mason corrected her gently. But your instincts were right then, and they're right now. We won't let him hurt you. The door opened as Shadow and Kid returned. They nodded respectfully to Emma before reporting. Reed drove to the diner, circled twice, then headed toward Maple Court. Shadow said, his voice quiet but precise, likely checking her usual locations. He'll realize soon enough she's not following her normal patterns, Kid added. That's when he'll get desperate. Mason introduced Emma to the newcomers watching as she shook their hands with growing confidence. She was scared but not paralyzed by fear. That was good. They could work with that. We've got a fallback position, Bear announced, ending his call with Sullivan. Cabin about 20 miles outside town. FBI safe house officially unused at the moment. Mason raised an eyebrow. Sullivan offered that up easily. Bear shrugged his massive shoulders. I can be persuasive. Gather your gear, Mason ordered. We move in 15 minutes. Emma, stay with Doc. As the team prepared to relocate, Mason pulled Bear aside. Sullivan's being awfully accommodating. Bear nodded, his expression grim. Notice that too. Either he's desperate to catch Reed or there's something he's not telling us, Mason finished. Wouldn't be the first time feds used us as pawns. Bear said bitterly, memories of past operations shadowing his features. Keep your eyes open, Mason instructed, all directions. 15 minutes later, two vehicles pulled away from the Crossroads Motel. Mason, Emma, and Doc in Mason's rented truck. Bear, Shadow, and Kid following on motorcycles. The safe house awaited, and with it perhaps answers. The cabin sat nestled among pine trees, accessible only by a winding dirt road that discouraged casual visitors. A single story with a covered porch, it looked more like a vacation rental than a government safe house. But Mason noted the reinforced door frames, window shutters that could be barred from inside, and the unobstructed sight lines in all directions. Tactical considerations disguised as rustic charm. Inside the cabin was sparsely but adequately furnished. A main room with a stone fireplace, small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, bathroom. Bear immediately began a security sweep while Shadow checked communication options. Landline works, Shadow reported. No cell service this far out. Generator out back, Bear added. Full tank. Water from a well filtration system looks recent. Kid brought in duffel bags, setting them on the kitchen table. Perimeter's clear. Good defensive position. Single approach road gives us early warning. Emma stood in the center of the room, watching their practiced efficiency with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Mason approached her, keeping his voice low. You doing okay? She nodded unconvincingly. Just processing. Yesterday, my biggest worry was making rent. Today, I'm in a secret cabin with 5 strange men hiding from a potential serial killer. It's a lot to take in, Mason acknowledged. Who are you people really? Emma asked. I mean, I know you're ex-military, but this? She gestured around the cabin. This isn't normal retired soldier behavior. Mason considered how much to share. We all served, yes. Different branches, different conflicts. But we shared something in common when we got out. What's that? Purpose, Doc interjected, joining them. Or lack thereof, civilian life doesn't always have room for the skill sets we developed. And we saw too many people falling through the cracks. Bear added, his deep voice carrying from across the room. Good people, the system failed. Emma looked around at each of them. So you formed some kind of, what vigilante rescue team? Mason smiled slightly. We prefer specialized intervention group. We don't go looking for trouble, Kid explained, unpacking equipment on the table. But when it finds us or finds people who can't defend themselves, we intervene, Shadow finished simply. Emma seemed to digest this. And now you're intervening for me. That's right, Mason confirmed. Emma wrapped her arms around herself again. I still don't understand why. Why me? Mason shared a look with Bear before responding. That's what we need to figure out. Reed's pattern with you is different. Extended surveillance, no direct confrontation yet. It suggests something specific about you has his attention. I told you I'm nobody, Emma insisted. Everybody's somebody, Doc said gently, and everybody has a past. Emma tensed. What's that supposed to mean? Mason studied her reaction. Is there something in your past you haven't told us, something that might make you a target? Emma's eyes darted away. No, of course not. The room fell silent. Mason could feel the others watching, sensing the same thing he did. Emma was hiding something. Before he could press further, Bear changed the subject. We should establish watches, 4-hour rotations, 2 men per shift. Mason nodded, letting Emma off the hook temporarily. Bear and I will take first watch. Doc, get some rest. Shadow Kid, secure the perimeter one more time, then sleep. We'll need everyone fresh. As the team dispersed to their assignments, Emma approached Mason. Where should I? She gestured vaguely. Second bedroom, Mason directed. Try to get some sleep. Emma nodded but hesitated. Mason, thank you, all of you. I know I'm not being completely... She trailed off. When you're ready to talk, we'll listen, Mason said simply. She nodded again and disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Bear moved to Mason's side. She's holding back. Yes, Mason agreed. Question is, does it matter? If it's connected to Reed, it might be the key to understanding why he's after her. Mason stared at the closed bedroom door. She'll tell us when she's ready. Until then, we protect her regardless. Bear clapped a hand on Mason's shoulder. You always did have a soft spot for strays. Mason's mouth twitched. Look who's talking. Outside, the Montana night settled over the cabin, stars emerging in a clear October sky. Inside, the Steel Guardians prepared for whatever might come. And in the second bedroom, Emma Wilson sat on the edge of the bed holding a small photograph she'd kept hidden in her wallet. A reminder of a past she'd tried desperately to escape. Dawn broke over the cabin with tentative fingers of light. Mason sat on the porch watching the dirt road while nursing a cup of instant coffee. Behind him, the cabin door opened, and Emma emerged wrapped in a borrowed flannel shirt against the morning chill. Couldn't sleep, Mason asked without turning. Emma settled into the chair beside him. Not much, too many thoughts. Mason offered her his coffee. She accepted it gratefully, taking a small sip before handing it back. Your friends, she began. They're good men. The best I know, Mason agreed. Bear told me about Grenada last night, about what happened to your lieutenant. Mason's jaw tightened. Bear talks too much. He thought I should understand why you're helping me, Emma explained. Said you made a promise never to leave anyone behind again. It's not just about that promise, Mason said after a moment. It's about doing what's right when no one else will. Emma was quiet for a long time, watching the sunrise paint the Montana mountains gold and crimson. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. My real name isn't Emma Wilson. Mason turned to look at her. Her face was cast in profile, the morning light highlighting the tension in her features. I was born Rebecca Morgan, she continued, in Philadelphia. 5 years ago, I witnessed something I shouldn't have. A murder. The victim was a federal prosecutor investigating organized crime. Mason remained silent, giving her space to tell her story. I testified, helped put away Vincent DeMarco, underboss of the Philadelphia crime family. They promised me witness protection, a new identity, a fresh start. Emma, Rebecca, laughed bitterly. That lasted about 6 months. Funding cuts, program restructuring. Suddenly I was on my own with nothing but a new driver's license and social security number. You've been running ever since, Mason guessed. She nodded. Changing names, changing towns. I thought I'd finally found somewhere safe. Cedar Ridge is so small, so isolated. Who would look for me here? Victor Reed would, Mason said grimly. If that's even his real name, Emma replied. You think he works for the DeMarco family? Emma nodded. They swore they'd find me. No matter how far, no matter how long. That's what Vincent said at his sentencing. Mason processed this new information. Why didn't you tell us this yesterday? Because I've learned not to trust anyone with the truth, Emma said simply. Every time I've trusted someone, it's ended badly. The door opened behind them. Bear filled the door frame, his expression solemn. Thought I heard voices. Coffee on? Just instant, Mason replied. Bear grimaced. Better than nothing. As Bear disappeared back inside, Mason turned to Emma. I need to tell the others what you've shared. Fear flashed across her face. Is that safe? Those men in there would die before betraying your trust, Mason said with absolute conviction. But they need to know what we're really dealing with. Emma nodded reluctantly. Okay, but... She reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph she'd been looking at the night before. You should see this too. Mason took the worn photo. It showed a younger Emma, Rebecca, standing beside a tall, distinguished man in a suit. Both were smiling at the camera. That's David Marshall, Emma explained, the prosecutor who was killed. He was more than just a colleague. We were engaged. Mason studied the photo, understanding dawning. This isn't just about silencing a witness. It's personal. Emma took back the photo, carefully returning it to her pocket. Revenge, for both my testimony and for loving David. Inside the cabin movement, and voices indicated the others were awake. Mason stood, offering his hand to Emma. Come on, time to share the full story. Around the kitchen table, Emma repeated her story to the assembled Steel Guardians. Their reactions varied from Bear's barely contained anger to Shadow's calculating silence. When she finished, the room remained quiet for several moments. DeMarco family, Kid finally said. They don't typically use outside contractors. Agreed, Shadow added. They keep enforcement in-house, blood ties only. Unless they're expanding territory, Bear suggested. Might use locals for deniability. Doc, who had been silent throughout, finally spoke. Or Reed isn't working for DeMarco at all. All eyes turned to him. Doc continued, what if someone else wants Emma? Someone who knew her history and is using it as cover? Like who? Kid asked. Sullivan, Mason said suddenly. FBI agent Sullivan. Bear frowned. You think he's dirty? I think he's been too helpful, too convenient, Mason replied. And now we learn Emma's background involves a federal prosecutor's murder and a witness protection program that mysteriously fell apart. Emma looked alarmed. You think Sullivan is after me? I think we need more information, Mason said, standing. Bear, call Sullivan. Tell him we need to meet. Shadow Kid, I want you to return to town. Surveillance only. See if Reed's still there or if he's moved on. What about me? Doc asked. Stay with Emma. This cabin remains our secure location until we know more. As the team prepares to execute their assignments, Emma caught Mason's arm. What if you're wrong about Sullivan? What if he really is trying to help? Then we'll work with him, Mason assured her. But my gut says there's more to this than we know. And in my experience, when the FBI gets involved, the waters get muddy fast. Bear returned from using the landline. Sullivan agreed to meet, parking lot of the ranger station noon today. Mason checked his watch. That gives us 3 hours to prepare. Kid, before you head to town, help me set up some insurance. Emma watched as Mason and Kid disappeared outside with a duffel bag. What are they doing? Bear's expression was grim, making sure we're not walking into an ambush. The ranger station parking lot was empty, save for Sullivan's black sedan, when Mason and Bear arrived. They parked the truck at the far end, surveying the area before exiting. No obvious backup, Bear noted. Either he's confident or stupid. Or his backup is well hidden, Mason countered. Sullivan stood beside his car, sunglasses reflecting the midday sun. He raised a hand in greeting as they approached. Gentlemen, I was beginning to think you'd changed your minds. Had to take precautions, Mason replied. Sullivan smiled thinly. Of course. Where's Ms. Wilson? Safe, Bear said curtly. Sullivan studied them for a moment. You don't trust me. Should we? Mason asked. Fair enough. Sullivan removed his sunglasses. What do you want to know? Mason didn't hesitate. Rebecca Morgan. Sullivan's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. Who? Don't insult us, Bear growled. Emma Wilson is Rebecca Morgan, witness against Vincent DeMarco 5 years ago. Her witness protection mysteriously dissolved, and now Victor Reed is hunting her. Too many coincidences. Sullivan sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. She told you. Everything Mason confirmed, though it was a bluff. Now we want your version. Sullivan leaned against his car. Rebecca Morgan was placed in witness protection after testifying against Vincent DeMarco, yes. The program didn't mysteriously dissolve. She left voluntarily. Mason exchanged glances with Bear. This didn't match Emma's story. Why would she leave protection? Bear asked skeptically. Because she stole something before she entered the program, Sullivan said. Something valuable. Something the DeMarco family wants back. Mason kept his expression neutral despite his surprise. What did she steal? A ledger, Sullivan replied, containing account numbers contacts the entire financial structure of the DeMarco operation. Evidence we could have used to dismantle their organization completely. And you think she has this ledger? Bear asked. Sullivan nodded. We know she has it. She took it from David Marshall's safe after he was killed, used it as an insurance policy, then vanished with it when the heat died down. Mason processed this new information. And Reed, hired gun, Sullivan confirmed, working for DeMarco, but not to kill her, to recover the ledger. You've been using us, Mason said flatly, using her as bait to find this ledger. Sullivan didn't deny it. The ledger could bring down an entire criminal empire, worth the risk. Bear stepped forward menacingly. Risk to her, you mean? Sullivan stood his ground. Risk to all of us, including your team, Mr. Thompson. Mason put a restraining hand on Bear's arm. Why tell us this now? Because I need your help, Sullivan admitted. Reed is getting impatient. His methods are becoming more aggressive. If he gets to her before we do, he won't, Mason stated firmly. You can't guarantee that, Sullivan argued. Not without resources, cooperation. Mason considered the agent's words. What exactly are you proposing? A partnership, Sullivan said. Real this time. You keep Rebecca safe. I provide backup resources, intelligence. Together we locate the ledger and use it to bring down DeMarco. And Rebecca, Bear asked. What happens to her? Full immunity, Sullivan promised. New identity, new location, proper protection this time. Mason didn't respond immediately, weighing options, considering angles. Finally, he spoke. I'll discuss it with my team and with Emma. Sullivan nodded, putting his sunglasses back on. Don't take too long. Reed isn't working alone anymore. DeMarco sent reinforcements. As if on cue, Mason's radio crackled. Ghost, this is Shadow. Come in. Mason grabbed the radio. Go ahead. Multiple hostiles in town. 3 men heavily armed asking questions about the girl, not being subtle. Mason looked at Sullivan. You knew. Sullivan nodded grimly. They arrived this morning. 4 men, not 3. Professionals. Bear swore under his breath. Mason keyed the radio again. Shadow returned to base immediately. Full alert status. Already en route with Kid. Mason turned to Sullivan. Where's the 4th man? Sullivan's expression darkened. That's what concerns me. He wasn't with the others. The implications hit Mason immediately. He's hunting, checking locations outside town. The cabin, Bear realized. Mason was already running for the truck. Call Doc, warn him. Bear pulled out a satellite phone, dialing rapidly. After several seconds, his face went pale. No answer. Mason gunned the engine as Bear jumped in. The tires spun on gravel as they accelerated toward the highway. Sullivan's sedan followed close behind. "How far ahead of us are Shadow and Kid?" Bear asked, trying the satellite phone again. 20 minutes, maybe less, Mason estimated, pushing the truck to its limits. Not enough. Bear finally got through on the phone. "Dock hostiles inbound. Do you copy?" He listened, then cursed. "Broken transmission. Might have heard, might not." Mason's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Emma's face flashed in his mind, her whispered plea for help in the diner. Her trust in him despite everything. The photograph of her and David Marshall, a happiness long destroyed. "Faster!" he growled, pressing the accelerator to the floor. Behind them, Sullivan stayed close, his sedan weaving through traffic as they raced toward the cabin. Toward Emma, toward a confrontation Mason feared might have already begun. Grenada flashed in his memory. Lieutenant Parker left behind, the promise Mason had made. Never again. "Hold on, Emma," he whispered to himself. "We're coming." The truck roared down the highway, eating up miles, but Mason knew with sickening certainty that they might already be too late. The fourth man had too much of a head start. History was repeating itself. Someone was being left behind. But this time Mason swore the ending would be different. This time he would keep his promise. Guardian's Honor, Part 3. Doc Reynolds had survived 3 tours in combat zones, 2 helicopter crashes, and more firefights than he could count. Instinct training and a healthy dose of paranoia had kept him alive when others weren't so fortunate. Those same instincts were screaming at him now. The cabin had been quiet for almost an hour after Mason and Bear left to meet Sullivan. Emma was resting in her room, the emotional toll of her revelations having drained her. Doc had been checking his medical supplies, a habit that calmed his nerves when he first noticed it. Silence. Not the natural silence of the Montana wilderness. A different kind of silence. The absence of birds, of insects. The eerie stillness that came when someone disturbed the natural rhythm of the forest. Doc moved to the window, staying to the side of the frame as he'd been trained. Nothing moved along the dirt road leading to the cabin, but the hair on the back of his neck stood up nonetheless. He checked his sidearm, a 1911 45 he'd carried since Desert 1 in 80. The familiar weight offered little comfort against what his instincts were telling him. They weren't alone anymore. Doc moved quietly to Emma's door, rapping softly with his knuckles. "Emma, I need you to wake up." A muffled response, then footsteps. Emma opened the door, blinking sleep from her eyes. "What's wrong?" "Probably nothing," Doc said, voice low, eyes still scanning the cabin's windows. "But I need you to put your shoes on, quickly and quietly." Emma read the tension in his posture and didn't argue. She retreated into the room, emerging moments later with her shoes on, fully alert. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Not sure," Doc admitted. "Could be paranoia, could be company." He handed her a small 2-way radio. "If I tell you to run, you head straight for the storm cellar we showed you earlier. Radio Mason, tell him condition red." Emma clutched the radio, eyes wide. "You think it's Reed?" Doc didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the landline phone, lifting the receiver to his ear. His expression darkened. "Line's dead." The satellite phone lay on the kitchen table. Doc reached for it, then froze as he caught a flicker of movement through the window. Just a shadow passing quickly across the tree line, but unmistakably human. "We have company," Doc confirmed, voice calm, despite the racing of his heart. He pressed the satellite phone into Emma's hand. "Take this. Go to the cellar now. Stay there until you hear Mason's voice or mine." "What about you?" Emma asked, fear evident in her eyes. "I'll buy you time." Doc's voice left no room for argument. "Go now." Emma hesitated only a moment before slipping through the kitchen to the trap door hidden beneath a rug. Doc watched her disappear below, then moved into position. The cabin had been chosen for its defensive advantages. Thick walls, few windows, clear sight lines. Doc positioned himself where he could see both the front door and the main windows. His medical bag sat open on the counter, combat dressings and tourniquets within easy reach. Old habits. Minutes passed in tense silence. Doc controlled his breathing, keeping it slow and steady. Waiting, listening. Then came the sound of boot on the porch. Soft, careful, but unmistakable. Doc aimed at the door, finger resting lightly against the trigger. When it came, the attack didn't come from the front. Glass shattered as something crashed through the side window, a tear gas canister already spewing its contents. Doc dropped to the floor, pulling his shirt over his mouth. Not a random hunter, not local law enforcement. This was a professional hit. Gunfire erupted, bullets splintering wood as they tore through the cabin walls. Doc returned fire, aiming at muzzle flashes through the windows. 3 shooters, maybe 4, surrounding the cabin. In his ear, Doc's radio crackled. Bear's voice breaking up. "Doc, hostiles inbound. Do you copy?" Doc couldn't respond. Couldn't risk moving to the radio. Another tear gas canister crashed through a different window. The cabin was filling with smoke, making it impossible to see, difficult to breathe. Doc fired again, heard a cry of pain from outside. One down, maybe, but the others were closing in. He needed to move. Needed to reach Emma in the cellar, ensure she was safe. Crawling along the floor beneath the worst of the gas, Doc made his way toward the kitchen. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall, professional, stance, tactical gear. Not Victor Reed, someone new, someone worse. Doc fired twice. The figure fell. But as Doc rose to continue toward the cellar, pain exploded through his shoulder. He stumbled. Fell. Warm blood seeped through his fingers as he clutched the wound. "Damn," he muttered, applying pressure. Not fatal, but debilitating. He dragged himself toward the kitchen, leaving a trail of blood on the wooden floor. Behind him, the front door crashed open. Heavy boots on hardwood, voices professional controlled. "Sweep and clear. Find the girl." Doc pulled himself behind the kitchen counter, breathing labored gun ready for one last stand. He wouldn't let them reach Emma. Not while he still drew breath. Footsteps approached. Doc raised his gun. For a moment, Grenada flashed through his mind. Another time, another hopeless situation. They'd made it out then. Maybe, just maybe. The kitchen door swung open. Mason pushed the truck beyond what its engine should allow, the speedometer quivering past 90 on the narrow Montana highway. Bear sat rigid beside him, repeatedly trying the satellite phone. "Still nothing," Bear reported grimly. "Shadow and Kid are 10 minutes out from the cabin. We're still 20. Sullivan's sedan followed close behind the agent, keeping pace despite the reckless speed. Mason's mind raced faster than the truck, calculating angles, planning approaches, preparing for the worst. "Should have seen it coming," Mason muttered, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Should have never left them alone." "We couldn't know," Bear countered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Sullivan played us." "No, we played ourselves," Mason corrected bitterly. "Trusted too easily. Now Emma and Doc are paying the price." The road wound through pine forests, each curve bringing them closer to the cabin and whatever waited there. Mason's memory flashed to Lieutenant Parker and Grenada, to the promise he'd made. History couldn't repeat itself. He wouldn't allow it. The radio crackled. "Ghost, this is Shadow. We're approaching the cabin. No visible activity. Proceeding with caution." Mason snatched the radio. "Negative. Wait for backup. I repeat, wait for backup." Static answered him. Mason cursed, pressing harder on the accelerator. Bear braced himself against the dashboard as the truck took a curve too fast, tires squealing in protest. "They can't hear us," Bear said. "We're still out of range." "Then we'd better get in a range," Mason growled, pushing the truck even harder. The next 10 minutes stretched like hours, each second a lifetime. Finally, the turnoff to the cabin appeared ahead. Mason barely slowed as he swung the wheel, the truck fishtailing onto the dirt road. Behind them, Sullivan's sedan followed. As they approached the final bend, Mason killed the headlights, slowing just enough to maintain control on the unpaved road. Bear drew his weapon, checking it with practiced hands. "How do you want to play this?" Bear asked. "Hard and fast," Mason replied, his voice cold with determination. "We go in, we get our people, we get out." "And Reed his men." Mason's expression hardened. "They made their choice when they came after our family." The truck rounded the final curve and the cabin came into view. Mason's heart sank. Even in the fading daylight, the damage was evident. Windows shattered, door hanging from its hinges, bullet holes peppering the wooden walls. 2 motorcycles were parked haphazardly near the porch shadow, and Kid had arrived. Of Reed or his men, there was no sign. Mason stopped the truck 100 yards from the cabin, killing the engine. Sullivan pulled up behind them, exiting his sedan with gun already drawn. "Stay behind us," Mason ordered the agent as he and Bear advanced cautiously toward the cabin. The forest was silent, save for the cooling tick of the truck's engine. No gunfire, no voices, just eerie, unnatural quiet. They were 20 yards from the porch when the front door opened. Kid stepped out, his face, grim gun lowered but ready. Blood stained his jacket, not his own. "Clear," Kid called softly. "But you need to see this." Mason's stride quickened, Bear close behind. They mounted the porch steps, the wood creaking beneath their weight. The smell hit them, first cordite tear gas, and beneath it all, the metallic tang of blood. Inside the cabin was a war zone. Furniture, overturned walls, splintered with bullet holes, glass crunching underfoot. Shadow stood in the middle of the room, his usually impassive face tight with anger. Two bodies, Shadow reported. Not Reed's. Professionals. Military training. He gestured to the kitchen. And Doc. Mason moved past him, dread building in his chest. The kitchen was a tableau of violence. Blood smeared across the floor. Bullet holes in the cabinets. And Doc Reynolds propped against the counter, his shoulder heavily bandaged. Face pale but eyes alert. About damn time, Doc said weakly. Thought you were going to miss the party. Relief washed over Mason. Doc, you look like hell. Should see the other guys, Doc replied with a pained smile. Kid patched me up. Through and through. I'll live. Mason crouched beside his friend. Emma. Doc's expression changed a shadow crossing his face. She was in the storm cellar. Told her to hide there when they came. He nodded toward a rug that had been thrown aside, revealing a trap door. But she's gone, Mason. Cellar's empty. Back exit's been used. Mason felt the world tilt beneath him. She ran. Maybe, Doc said, or maybe someone found the exit. There was a lot of gunfire, a lot of confusion. I was down before I could check on her. Bear appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Found blood outside the cellar exit. Not much could be anything. Trail leads into the forest, then disappears near the creek. Sullivan pushed past Bear, taking in the scene with narrowed eyes. Your woman's good, Reynolds. 2 kill shots in low visibility conditions. He glanced at the bodies on the floor. These are DeMarco's men, top-tier contractors. Expensive. Save the admiration. Mason snapped, rising to his feet. Emma's missing. Reed is still out there, and you've got a hell of a lot of explaining to do. Sullivan's hand drifted toward his weapon. Careful, Hayes, we're on the same side here. Are we? Mason's voice was dangerous. Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a setup. You knew DeMarco's men were coming, knew the cabin's location, and somehow they found us hours after we moved in. Sullivan's face remained impassive. If I wanted you dead, or the girl captured, why would I be here now? To maintain your cover, Shadow suggested from the doorway, his own weapon held casually at his side. To know what we know, to find what the girl took. Tension crackled in the air. 4 steel guardians positioning themselves subtly around the FBI agent. Sullivan, to his credit, recognized the shift in power. He slowly raised his hands away from his weapon. I did not betray your position, he said carefully. But I suspect someone in my office did. Someone who's been watching me as closely as I've been watching Reed. Convenient theory, Bear growled. It's more than a theory, Sullivan insisted. DeMarco's influence reaches further than you think. Judges, cops, politicians. Why not FBI? Mason studied the agent's face, searching for deception. Finding none, he made a decision. Kid, stay with Doc. Get him stabilized for transport. Shadow, bear with me. We're going after Emma. I'm coming too, Sullivan said. Mason turned to him, expression cold. Why would I trust you now? Because I know Reed, Sullivan replied. I know how he thinks, how he moves. And because without the Bureau's resources, you'll never find him in time. Mason weighed the options. Time was critical. Emma had been gone for nearly an hour already. If Reed had her, fine, Mason decided, but you're unarmed. And if I even think you're playing us, I'll put you in the ground myself. Sullivan considered this, then slowly removed his weapon, holding it out grip first. Fair enough. Bear took the gun, checking it before tucking it into his belt. What's the play, Ghost? Mason's mind raced, calculating options, discarding plans almost as quickly as he formed them. Reed wants something Emma has, the ledger Sullivan mentioned. He won't kill her until he gets it. Assuming she has it, Shadow pointed out. She has it, Sullivan said with certainty. Question is where, and whether she'll give it up to save herself. Mason moved to the back door, examining the blood trail Bear had mentioned. Reed's a professional. He'll have a fallback position, somewhere to take her for questioning. Not his farmhouse, Bear said. Too obvious. Sullivan stepped forward. There's an abandoned hunting lodge about 8 miles north of here. Isolated, defensible. We've had it under surveillance as a possible location for the missing women. The women you think Reed took, Kid asked from the kitchen where he was tending to Doc. Sullivan nodded. If they're still alive, that's where they'd be. Mason exchanged glances with Bear and Shadow. The same thought crossed their minds. If Reed was holding other women captive, Emma's situation was even more desperate. Gear up, Mason ordered. Full tactical. Sullivan, you'll guide us to the lodge. We'll assess on arrival. He turned to Kid. Get Doc to a hospital, then join us when you can. Kid nodded, already helping Doc to his feet. Doc gritted his teeth against the pain, but managed to grasp Mason's arm as he passed. Bring her back, Ghost, Doc said, his voice strained but determined. Bring them all back. Mason clasped his friend's hand. Count on it. Outside dusk was settling over the Montana landscape. Mason checked his watch almost 2 hours since Emma had disappeared. 2 hours in the hands of a killer. Bear approached, carrying duffel bags from his motorcycle. Full kit, just like old times. This isn't a sanctioned op, Mason reminded him as they geared up. No backup, no extraction plan. Bear grinned wolfishly. When has that ever stopped us? Shadow joined them, his own equipment already prepared. Thermal imaging shows a heat signature moving north through the forest. Could be Emma, could be wildlife. It's her, Mason said with certainty. She's smart. She'd avoid roads stick to cover. Sullivan watched them prepare with professional interest. You move like a military unit. Once upon a time we were, Mason replied, checking his weapon. Now we're just men trying to keep a promise. Darkness gathered around them as they finished preparations. 4 men armed and determined, preparing to face unknown odds to rescue a woman who had come to mean more to them than just another mission. For Bear, Shadow and Kid Emma had become one of them. Steel Guardians took care of their own. For Mason, it was something more. Something he wasn't ready to name, but felt with increasing certainty. Emma Wilson, Rebecca Morgan had awakened something he thought had died in Grenada with Lieutenant Parker. Something like purpose, like hope. Ready? Bear announced, shouldering his pack. Mason nodded, his expression set in grim determination. Move out. Standard formation. Sullivan, you're with me. They disappeared into the gathering darkness. 4 shadows moving with purpose through the Montana wilderness. Ahead lay the hunting lodge Reed, and if they were lucky, Emma. If they were very lucky, they wouldn't be too late. Emma's lungs burned as she ran, each breath a knife in her chest. She'd been moving for what felt like hours, though the fading light suggested it had been less than one. The forest floor was treacherous, roots, rocks, fallen branches, all conspiring to slow her progress. Behind her, somewhere in the gathering darkness, they followed. How many, she couldn't be sure. 3, 4, she'd glimpsed only one, not Victor Reed, but someone equally dangerous. A professional hunter. The gunfire at the cabin had been deafening, terrifying. She'd huddled in the storm cellar radio, clutched to her chest, listening to the battle rage above. When the cellar door had begun to open, she'd fled through the escape tunnel. Doc had shown her emerging into the forest behind the cabin. She'd run blindly at first, panic, driving her deeper into the wilderness. Only when the sounds of combat had faded did she slow, try to orient herself. North, Mason had said, if they were ever separated, head north to the ridgeline. There was a fire tower there, a safe place with communications equipment. But north meant open ground eventually. Cover was safer. So she'd angled northeast, staying within the tree line, using the setting sun as a guide. The radio had been silent since her flight began. Either Mason and the others couldn't hear her calls, or she pushed the thought away. They were alive. They had to be. Her only hope lay in reaching the fire tower, contacting them somehow. Emma paused, leaning against a pine tree, catching her breath, listening. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects. Just a soft whisper of wind through pine needles. And something else. A cracking twig. Soft, deliberate, close. She froze, pressing herself against the rough bark, trying to control her ragged breathing. 30 yards back, a shadow moved between trees. Humanoid, hunting her. Emma slid down, making herself smaller behind a fallen log. The figure paused, head turning, slowly scanning. He hadn't seen her, not yet, but he was closing in, quartering the area with practiced efficiency. The radio in her pocket felt impossibly heavy. If she called for help now, the sound would give away her position instantly. If she didn't, she'd have to evade her pursuer alone in failing light in unfamiliar terrain. She thought of Doc, wounded or worse, back at the cabin, of Mason and the others perhaps already searching for her, of David Marshall, who had died trying to bring down the DeMarco family. Slowly, carefully, Emma removed her outer jacket. It was damp with sweat, would hold her scent. She bunched it up, then in one swift motion, threw it as far as she could to her left. It landed with a soft thump among the underbrush. The effect was immediate. The hunter turned, weapon raised, moving cautiously toward the sound. Emma used the distraction to slip away to the right, keeping low, moving as silently as her trembling legs would allow. 20 yards. 50. The distance between them grew. Emma permitted herself a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could make it to the ridge. That hope died as a hand clamped over her mouth from behind an arm, like iron around her waist, lifting her off her feet. She struggled, kicked, but her captor held her effortlessly. "Stop fighting," a voice whispered harshly in her ear. "I'm not here to hurt you." Emma went still, confusion replacing terror. The voice wasn't that of Victor Reed, it was female. Slowly, the hand over her mouth relaxed, though the arm around her waist remained firm. Emma was turned around to face her captor, a woman perhaps 10 years her senior with short gray hair and the hard eyes of someone who had seen too much. "Who are you?" Emma whispered. "Someone who wants to live," the woman replied. "Someone who knows what Reed will do if he finds us." She glanced over Emma's shoulder, scanning the forest. "We need to move. He's called in the others." Emma hesitated, uncertain. "How do I know I can trust you?" The woman's smile was bitter. "You don't. But right now, I'm your only chance of surviving until your friends find us." "My friends?" "The men from the cabin. Military types." The woman tugged Emma's arm. "Come on, there's a place, not far. We can hide there until dark." Still uncertain, but with few options, Emma allowed herself to be led deeper into the forest. The woman moved with confidence, clearly familiar with the terrain. After 10 minutes of silent travel, they reached a fallen pine whose massive root system created a natural cave. "In here," the woman directed, pushing aside branches to reveal a narrow opening. "Quickly!" Emma squeezed through, finding a space just large enough for two people to sit huddled together. The woman followed, pulling the branches back into place behind her, concealing the entrance. "Who are you?" Emma asked again as they settled into the cramped space. "How do you know about Reed, about my friends?" In the dim light filtering through the branches, the woman's face was all angles and shadows. "My name is Sandra Mercer. I used to be a waitress in Billings. 3 months ago, Victor Reed started coming into my diner." She paused, the memory clearly painful. "2 months ago, he took me." Emma's breath caught. "You're one of the missing women." Sandra nodded. "There were 4 of us, now just 3. Carla didn't make it." Emma felt sick. Mason and the others had suspected Reed was connected to disappearances across the region, but hearing it confirmed made the danger all the more real. "Why did he take you?" Emma asked. "What does he want?" "Information at first," Sandra replied. "He asked about specific customers, people who came to the diner. Seemed to think I knew something." Her voice hardened. "When I couldn't tell him what he wanted, he kept me anyway. Said I might be useful later." "And the others, the other women?" "Same story, different diners. All of us worked places where men talked business, shared secrets. All of us overheard things we shouldn't have." Sandra's eyes focused intently on Emma. "But you're different. He wants you specifically. Talks about you all the time, about what you took. The ledger. It had to be." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "Where are the others, the other women?" "Hunting cabin about 2 miles from here. That's where he takes us for questioning." Sandra's voice broke slightly on the last word. "That's where we were headed when I saw my chance and ran. Been hiding out here for 3 days watching. Saw them bring you to that other cabin. Saw the attack." Emma's mind raced, trying to process everything. If Sandra was telling the truth, Reed was holding 2 other women captive nearby, and if she was lying, "Why help me?" Emma asked. "Why risk recapture?" Sandra's expression was resolute. "Because you're the first person to come looking for any of us. Your friends, they're military or ex-military, right? They might actually have a chance against Reed and his men." She leaned forward. "You're our only hope of getting out of here alive." Emma thought of Mason, of his promise never to leave anyone behind, of the Steel Guardians and their unspoken code. If anyone could save them, it would be them. "My friends will come," Emma said with conviction. "And when they do, Reed will regret ever having heard my name." Sandra's smile was thin but genuine. "I hope you're right." She glanced at the fading light visible through the branches. "We should rest while we can. At nightfall, we'll try for the ridge. Your friends will look for you there." Emma nodded, settling back against the dirt wall of their hiding place. As darkness fell, she thought of Mason. Wondered if he was searching for her already. Wondered if he'd find her in time. The ledger that had brought all this down upon them sat hidden where no one would think to look, sewn into the lining of her purse, abandoned at the cabin in her haste to escape. An insurance policy that had become a death sentence. Emma closed her eyes, exhaustion temporarily overwhelming fear. Beside her, Sandra kept watch, a guardian against the gathering night. But the hunting lodge appeared exactly as Sullivan had described it. A large log structure set back from an overgrown access road surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides with a cliff face to the rear. A single light glowed from within, barely visible through heavy curtains. Mason studied it through night vision goggles, cataloging details with professional precision. 2 vehicles parked outside the gray Caprice Reed had been driving, and a black SUV with government plates. Two men visible on patrol, moving with military discipline. Multiple entry points all likely monitored. Government plates, Bear whispered beside him. This is looking less like a DeMarco operation and more like something official. Sullivan, kneeling between them, nodded grimly. Told you. DeMarco's influence reaches far. Mason lowered the goggles. Shadow report. Shadow's voice came through their comms, calm and precise. Perimeter has motion sensors and cameras. Counted 4 hostiles on rotation. 2 outside, at least 2 inside. Thermal shows multiple heat signatures in the basement level. Could be equipment, could be people. Emma, Mason said with certainty, and possibly other captives. Sandra Mercer, Sullivan supplied. Tiffany Lawson, Melissa Cardenas, all reported missing within the last 3 months. All waitresses from diners across 3 states. Mason's jaw tightened. If they're alive, we get them all out. Odds aren't great, Bear pointed out. 4 of us, at least 4 of them, plus Reed. Unknown number of captives, unknown layout inside. Mason's expression was resolute. We've faced worse. In uniform, Sullivan reminded him. With sanction, this is different. If anything goes wrong, we're already past that point. Mason cut him off. Emma's in there, possibly others. There's no walking away from this. Sullivan studied him for a moment, then nodded. What's the play? Mason surveyed the lodge again. Direct approach is suicide. We need a distraction. He turned to Bear. Remember Mogadishu, the marketplace extraction? Bear's eyes lit with recognition. Smokescreen, I like it. Mason detailed the plan quickly. Bear would create a diversion on the far side of the lodge. Smoke grenades controlled charges to simulate an attack from multiple positions. Shadow would disable the surveillance system. Mason and Sullivan would enter through the rear near the cliff face where coverage would be weakest. Primary objective is locating and extracting the captives, Mason emphasized. Reed is secondary. And if Reed resists, Sullivan asked. Mason's expression hardened. Then he becomes a casualty of his own operation. They synchronize watches, 20 minutes to position, then execution. Bear and Shadow melted into the darkness to prepare their parts of the operation. Mason turned to Sullivan. Last chance to back out. Once this starts, there's no turning back. Sullivan checked the spare weapon Mason had reluctantly provided him. I've been tracking Reed for months. Watched him take women knowing I couldn't move without evidence. If they're in there, his voice hardened. I'm seeing this through. They moved through the forest in silence, circling toward the cliff face behind the lodge. Mason's mind was focused clear. Years of operations had taught him to compartmentalize, to channel fear and uncertainty into precision and control. But beneath that training, emotions roiled. Emma's face haunted him, her whispered plea for help in the diner, her trust as she shared her true identity, her determination despite overwhelming odds. She had become more than a mission, more than someone to save. They reached position with 3 minutes to spare. Mason signaled readiness through his comm device. Received confirmation from Bear and Shadow. The plan was in motion. Precisely on time, the night erupted into chaos. Multiple explosions echoed across the valley as Bear's charges detonated in sequence. Smoke billowed from 3 positions around the lodge. Gunfire, Bear shooting wide, creating the illusion of a large attacking force. The effect was immediate. The 2 guards outside rushed toward the explosion's weapons ready. Lights came on inside the lodge. Shouts carried through the night air. Now, Mason ordered, moving forward with Sullivan close behind. They reached the rear of the lodge, undetected, finding a service entrance partially concealed by overgrown bushes. The lock was substantial but yielded to Mason's practiced touch with a set of picks. Inside the lodge was eerily silent, despite the chaos outside. The guards had responded to the perceived threat, leaving the interior vulnerable. Mason and Sullivan moved efficiently through a kitchen area, then down a hallway lined with hunting trophies, deer heads and bear skins, watching their progress with glass eyes. Basement access should be near the main room, Sullivan whispered, weapon sweeping the corridor ahead. They found it a heavy door with a padlock, recently installed, incongruous with the rustic decor. Mason made quick work of the lock, easing the door open to reveal a staircase descending into darkness. The smell hit them first, damp earth mildew, and beneath it all the unmistakable scent of fear. Human fear. Mason activated his tactical light, illuminating rough wooden steps leading down. At the bottom, another door. No lock this time, just a simple latch. Mason signaled Sullivan to cover him, then pulled it open in one swift motion. The basement was large, once used for storage. Now it had been converted into something else entirely. Metal cots lined one wall, A table covered in tools, surgical instruments, restraints, things designed to cause pain, and cages. 3 human-sized cages. 2 were occupied. Mason moved quickly to the first cage. Inside, a woman lay curled in a fetal position, thin, pale, but alive. Her eyes opened at his approach, widening with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. U.S. Navy, Mason said softly, reassuringly. We're here to get you out. Tears filled the woman's eyes. He said no one was coming, said no one would even look. He was wrong, Mason assured her, working on the cage's lock. We've been looking, and now we're taking you home. Sullivan moved to the second cage where another woman sat huddled in a corner. Melissa Cardenas, he asked gently. The woman nodded weakly. Who are you? FBI, Sullivan replied. You're safe now. Mason got the first cage open, helping the woman out. Tiffany Lawson. She nodded, legs unsteady after weeks of confinement. The others, Sandra. We haven't found Sandra yet, Mason admitted, moving to help Sullivan with the second lock. Was there another woman brought in recently, blonde hair, late 20s? Tiffany shook her head. Just us 3. Sandra escaped 3 days ago. He's been angry, hunting her. Mason exchanged glances with Sullivan. If Emma wasn't here, where was she? The question was answered by the sound of a gun being cocked behind them. Looking for someone, Hayes. Mason turned slowly. Victor Reed stood at the foot of the stairs, weapon trained on them with practiced precision. But it was the figure beside him that froze Mason's blood. Emma, her face bruised, arm twisted behind her back by Reed's free hand. Drop your weapons, Reed ordered calmly, or I redecorate this basement with her brains. Mason's mind raced, calculating angles, options. Sullivan stood to his left, partially shielded by the open cage door. The 2 rescued women huddled behind them, terrified but alive. Emma's eyes met his, conveying a complex message. Fear, certainly, but also determination. And something else. Something like a signal. I said drop them, Reed repeated, pressing the gun harder against Emma's temple. Now. Mason slowly placed his weapon on the ground. Sullivan followed suit, his movements careful, deliberate. Kick them away, Reed directed. They complied. The gun skittered across the concrete floor, out of reach. Reed smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. Agent Sullivan, what a surprise. I expected the Navy boy and his friends. But you, this complicates things. It's over, Reed, Sullivan said evenly. The Bureau knows everything. The women, the DeMarco connection, all of it. Reed laughed, the sound chilling in its genuine amusement. The Bureau doesn't know shit. If they did, they'd have moved on me months ago. His eyes narrowed. No, you've been operating on your own, haven't you? Obsessed, reckless, the kind of agent who gets quietly transferred when this all goes south. Mason watched Emma carefully. Her posture had changed subtly. Weight shifting, preparing. He recognized the signs she was going to make a move. He needed to be ready. Where's the ledger? Rebecca, Reed asked, returning his attention to Emma. Tell me now, and maybe these people walk out of here. Emma's voice was steady despite her obvious pain. It's Emma, and I don't have what you're looking for. Reed's expression hardened. Wrong answer. He shifted his aim, pointing his weapon at Tiffany Lawson. Perhaps some motivation, one dead hostage, might loosen your tongue. Wait, Emma cried. It's in my purse, back at the cabin, sewn into the lining. Reed studied her face, looking for deception. Finding none, he smiled. See how easy that was? Now we all take a little trip back to the cabin. Retrieve the ledger. Then decide what happens to all of you. Mason caught Emma's eye again. A nearly imperceptible nod passed between them. Whatever was about to happen, they were in it together. There's just one problem with your plan, Reed, Mason said, drawing the man's attention. And what's that, sailor boy? Reed asked mockingly. Mason smiled. You still think you're in control? The basement exploded into action. Emma drove her elbow back into Reed's solar plexus with surprising force. Simultaneously, Mason lunged forward, closing the distance between them. Sullivan dove for the discarded weapons. Reed recovered quickly, professional training overcoming the momentary shock. He backhanded Emma, sending her sprawling, then brought his weapon to bear on Mason. Too late. Mason was already inside his guard, deflecting the gun hand upward as a shot rang out, the bullet embedding in the ceiling. They grappled, Reed's combat training evident in his movements. He was good, very good. But Mason had trained his entire adult life for exactly this kind of fight, close quarters. No rules, lives on the line. Reed landed a solid blow to Mason's ribs, then another to his jaw. Pain exploded through Mason's head, but he absorbed it, channeled it. Countered with a strike to Reed's throat, that sent the man stumbling back, gasping. Sullivan had retrieved his weapon but couldn't fire with Mason and Reed locked in combat. Emma crawled toward the cage, pulling Tiffany and Melissa deeper into the shelter of the metal bars. Reed pulled a knife from his boot, 6 inches of serrated steel that gleamed in the basement's harsh light. He slashed with practiced precision, the blade slicing through Mason's jacket, drawing blood from his forearm. Mason dropped into a defensive stance, circling, watching the knife, waiting for his moment. It came when Reed lunged forward, overextending slightly. Mason caught the knife arm twisted, using Reed's momentum against him. There was a sickening crack as the arm broke at the elbow. Reed howled in pain, the knife clattering to the floor, but even wounded, he was dangerous. His good arm came up a small backup pistol, appearing as if by magic. Before he could aim, 3 shots rang out in rapid succession. Reed staggered, eyes wide with shock. Blood bloomed across his chest in 3 distinct points. Sullivan stood 10 feet away, his stance-perfect weapon still trained on Reed. "Federal agent," he said unnecessarily as Reed collapsed to the floor. "You're under arrest." Mason moved quickly to Emma, helping her to her feet. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her face was pale beneath the bruising. "Found Sandra in the woods. She helped me hide. Reed caught us as we tried for the ridge," her voice faltered. "Sandra, he shot her when she tried to run. I don't know if she's—" "Baron Shadow will find her," Mason assured her. "If she's alive, they'll get her help." Emma's legs gave way, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally ebbing. Mason caught her, supporting her weight as they moved toward the stairs. Sullivan knelt beside Reed, checking for a pulse. Finding one, he began applying pressure to the wounds. "He'll live to stand trial, testify against DeMarco. If he makes it that far," Mason said grimly, thinking of the extensive corruption Sullivan had described. "DeMarco's reach is long." Upstairs, the sounds of conflict had ceased. Mason's radio crackled. "Ghost, this is Bear. Perimeter secure. Hostiles neutralized." "Roger that," Mason responded. "We have the package and 2 additional civilians, 1 wounded hostile, possible civilian casualty in the surrounding forest, female gunshot wound. Find her." "Already on it," Bear replied. "Shadow's tracking a blood trail now." Mason guided Emma up the stairs, Sullivan following with the 2 rescued women. In the main room of the lodge, Bear waited, his massive frame blocking the doorway, weapon at the ready. "Clear outside," Bear reported. "Kid just arrived with the cavalry. State police feds the works. Doc's with them, refused to stay at the hospital." Emma sagged against Mason, relief overwhelming her. "It's over," she asked, barely a whisper. Mason tightened his arm around her shoulders. "It's over." Outside, the night was alive with flashing lights. Voices, the organized chaos of law enforcement securing a scene. Paramedics rushed forward, taking charge of the rescued women, guiding them toward waiting ambulances. Mason stood with Emma at the edge of the activity, his arms still supporting her. Bear, Shadow, and Kid formed a protective circle around them, keeping the authorities at bay for a few precious moments of peace. "The ledger?" Mason asked quietly. Emma managed a small smile despite her exhaustion. "Really is in my purse. Insurance policy. Never thought it would come to this." "It's evidence now," Mason said. "We'll help put DeMarco away for good." Emma nodded, then her expression grew serious. "What happens now to me?" Mason glanced at Sullivan, who was speaking with a group of FBI agents. "Witness protection again, I'd imagine. New identity, new location." Something like sadness crossed Emma's face. "Starting over. Again." Mason hesitated, then spoke the words that had been forming in his mind since their first meeting. "Unless you'd rather not be alone this time." Emma looked up at him, questioning. "Steel Guardians look after their own," Mason continued. "And you're one of us now. If you wanted—" He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. Emma understood. Her hand found his fingers intertwining. "I think I'd like that," she said softly, "not being alone." Around them, the night hummed with activity. Somewhere in the forest, Shadow had found Sandra Mercer alive, barely but fighting. Reed was being loaded into an ambulance under heavy guard. The other women were receiving medical attention, their ordeal finally over. But for Mason Hayes and Emma Wilson, something was just beginning. Something neither had expected to find in a small Montana diner on a rainy night. Something like a second chance. Doc approached his arm in a sling, face pale but determined. "They found Sandra. She's critical but stable. Should make it." Emma's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank God." Doc nodded toward the federal agents gathering near the lodge. "Sullivan's keeping them at bay for now. But they'll want statements soon from all of us." Mason nodded. "We'll be ready." Bear joined them, his expression uncharacteristically gentle as he looked at Emma. You did good, little lady, real good. Emma managed a small smile. Couldn't have done it without all of you. Kid appeared with blankets, draping one around Emma's shoulders. Family takes care of family, he said simply. The word hung in the air between them. Family. Something most of them had lost or left behind years ago. Something they'd found again in each other. And now in Emma. Mason looked at the people gathered around him, Bear Doc, Shadow Kid. Men who had followed him into combat, into danger, into the unknown. Men who had become more than comrades. Brothers in every way that mattered. And Emma, who had whispered for help in a diner and ended up saving them all in ways they couldn't have imagined. The ledger would put DeMarco away. Justice for David Marshall, for the women Reed had taken for Emma herself. A chapter closing, but another was opening. What now, Ghost Bear asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Mason looked at Emma, then at his team, his family. Now we go home, together. The Montana night spread above them, stars emerging from behind passing clouds. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The sound of the wilderness, not threatening now, but peaceful, promising. Mason Hayes had made a promise in Grenada years ago, never to leave anyone behind again. Tonight he had kept that promise, and in doing so had found something he thought lost forever. A home, a family, a future. The Steel Guardians gathered close, a circle of protection around Emma, as the authorities approached. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Bound not by blood, but by something stronger, choice, loyalty, love. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Mason Hayes looked forward to the journey. And he wasn't traveling alone. Guardian's Honor. Epilogue, 1 year later, June 1987. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the mountain cabin, warming the pine floors and catching dust motes that danced in the golden beams. Emma stood at the kitchen counter, coffee cup in hand, watching Mason chop wood outside. His movements were methodical, powerful, the routine of a man at peace. The axe rose and fell, splitting logs for their winter stockpile, even though summer had barely begun. Always prepared, she murmured to herself, smiling. The past year had transformed her life in ways she never could have imagined that rainy night at Sunrise Diner. DeMarco's trial had concluded 3 months ago. 16 federal charges, 37 state charges, and a sentence that ensured he would never again see the outside of a prison. The ledger had been everything Sullivan promised, exposing a criminal network that reached into city halls, police departments, and even the FBI itself. Emma touched the small scar on her cheekbone, a permanent reminder of Victor Reed. He hadn't made it to trial. 2 weeks after his capture, he was found dead in his hospital room. Heart failure, the official report said. Bear had simply nodded when they heard the news. DeMarco tying up loose ends, he'd said. Some problems solve themselves. The cabin door banged open as Doc entered, medical bag in hand. His shoulder had healed well, though he claimed it still predicted rain better than the weatherman. Bear and Kid just radioed, he announced. They'll be here by sundown. Shadow's bringing that girl from the bureau, Sullivan's protege. Emma nodded. Lisa Matthews, a young FBI agent who'd been instrumental in building the case against DeMarco. She was good people, as Bear would say. Everything ready for the celebration? Doc asked, setting his bag on the counter. As ready as it'll ever be, Emma replied. Tonight marked 1 year since what they now simply called Montana. 1 year since they'd become a family. Not the family Emma had lost, or the one any of them had been born into, but something chosen. Something stronger. Outside, Mason set down the axe and wiped sweat from his brow. He glanced up at the cabin, found Emma watching, and smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes. Those eyes had softened over the months, the vigilant edge never completely gone, but tempered now with something like contentment. Emma's hand drifted to the small velvet box hidden in her pocket. She'd found it yesterday while putting away Mason's laundry. Navy tradition dictated he'd be the one to ask, but Emma had never been one for tradition. Tonight, surrounded by the people who had become her shield against the darkness, she would propose her own question about the future. From the back bedroom came the sounds of gentle snoring. Sandra Mercer visiting for the week. Her recovery had been long, but she'd emerged stronger, determined to help other survivors find their way back. Tiffany and Melissa had joined her efforts, the 3 women forming an unlikely but effective support network. Mason climbed the porch steps, boots heavy on the wooden boards. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a summer storm approaching the mountains. But unlike before, the sound brought no fear, only the comfort of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Emma set down her coffee cup and walked to the door. The Steel Guardians would all be together again tonight. Family, taking care of family. No matter what came next, they would face it the same way they had faced everything else, together.